Yep, perfect. All right, well, this is John Adcox, the author, and Carol Bales, the illustrator of Raven Wakes the World. And you guys can take it away and start chatting.
Sure. This is a collaboration that Carol and I started years and years and years ago when we were just young and fresh and full of optimism and joy. And we had this idea that it would be fun to make books every year to give our friends as Christmas gifts. So I would write a story and Carol did magnificent illustrations. And then we bound them by hand and gave them out to our friends. And then, oh, sorry, Liz, one of your questions was how these books come to be. So maybe skip that one. We, later on, eventually did 4 of them. And I pitched them to Lou as a collection of short stories. I should mention that I tend to write on the longish side. So what I called a short story might have been pushing closer to novella. And Lou said, these really need to be expanded and just turn them into novels because they're, halfway there already. So, they basically each got doubled in length, which was harder than it sounds because, I thought the story was finished. And I was asking Lou, what's not there? And it turns out Lou had a long list of things that weren't there. A large part of it was just the relationship between the 2 main characters. So fleshing that out and making their budding friendship and eventual romance more of a thing. I don't think that when they go out to dinner, I don't think that was in the original version. And the original version just they played a game and made up new rules. I was saying, don't leave it there. What's the game? So expanding all that really made the story feel a lot richer and much more alive. I've always had a fascination with mythology and how stories reflect what's going on in our own lives and our own hearts and give us little hints and pointers of who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to be living our lives. So dipping into a mythology that I wasn't familiar with and exploring that and making it relevant in a modern world was just an absolute joy. And expanding that, bringing out the mythopoeic elements a lot more strongly, really made me fall in love with the story all over again. And then Carol had a chance to go back and revisit the illustrations that she had done. And I'm going to tell a story on you, Carol, sorry. But she was talking about, I'm probably going to redraw a lot of them, but she found them and was going, wow, I really like these illustrations a lot more than I remembered. So she did do a lot of touching up, but most of them were in the original. But actually, Carol, do you want to talk about the illustrations now?
I can.
Yeah.
All right, well, Carol, let me hold on a second. I've got to make you a co-host. No, I've got to make you a host because
I think
co-host.
I can just share. I can just share my screen.
Right, you can't until you're the host. Now you can.
Okay. Okay. So let me share this. I just put together a few thoughts on it. Turning it from what had been like a hand-bound a little bit more handcrafted experience into a book, there were a few opportunities there that were really kind of fun to work on. So this is where we were, how it started, and for the cover, we just wanted to kind of reflect some of the starkness and kind of some of the texture that went into the original cover. And so I mean, I actually scanned the textured paper that we had used and turned it into pattern, and then introduced, found this great, I didn't draw that, I found that great raven illustration. And that's how the cover came about. And then the opportunity of designing a book was a really new challenge. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized, well, there's kind of an opportunity here to continue to kind of tell the motif, kind of introduce the motifs in a little bit of a different way. The illustrations themselves, I didn't change up too much, but they were meant to just capture some little snapshots, little moments in the telling of the story, that just nice little moments that I thought would be good to bring to life a little bit. And in terms of the book design, then the opportunity then to look at the whole thing as a book and look at the page design and all of that, it became a little bit more important. And so John had suggested, he was like, oh, we need put in some good drop caps. I was like, okay, well, let me go look at drop caps and let me go see what's going on there. And I realized, you know, none of them really fitted exactly what I wanted to convey. And I thought, well, you know, each one of those can be their own little story. And so these are all the drop caps in the book. And you'll notice that it begins with an I and it ends with an I. So I thought, well, that's kind of cool. Let me just take advantage of that. And so you'll notice for each one, as it progresses, it kind of progresses through this, it transitions. So the first one is stark, and it's just the letter I. It's completely alone. It's free of embellishment. There's absolutely nothing going on there. It's just a letter I in a field of white. And so what I did was I found, as I started to look for kind of symbols or visual representations of what I wanted to work with, I ended up boiling it down to these 4 items right here. So we have the frame. We have, this is actually a stylized representation of frost that appears on a window pane. You've got the crow, you've got a sprig of, let's call it a sprig of holly. It's a sprig of something, it's got berries on it. I imagine they're red. And then you've got something that's more frost on a window pane. And so all of the drop caps are a combination of those elements. And I decided that this was going to represent Katie, the main character in the story, because it was both frost, but there's also something really kind of exuberant about that there's so much movement in that gesture. It is frozen in one place, but it's got a lot of movement and life to it. And then of course we have the crow, and then this sort of represents awakening, renewal. There are a lot of great themes in the story to work with. Spring, freshness, and then the frost itself. And being frozen is not, I mean, I don't want to bash being frozen. Cocooning, there's nothing wrong with cocooning. So I think Katie was cocooning, and it's not like there was anything wrong with that. So I just sort of, it's an element of its own, and it's not bad. So for each of these, so for instance, we've got the A, we introduce Katie, we start to learn more about Katie and her situation, and we find out that she's kind of frozen, and then she goes into town. So with each chapter, something happens. She goes into town, we meet Raven for the first time. We see some berries and light and fixtures, and there's a little bit of life going on there, but it's still quite stark. And then as each of these progress, they start to change the dominance. So the frost starts to take more of a back seat. You start to see more of the berries. And then there's some stuff going on where they start to get together, and it becomes more, there's more symmetry to it. There's more, there's symmetry, but not perfect symmetry, but they are combining to become one thing. And then as time progresses, I'm making a really long story of this, sorry, but as time progresses, they start to separate again. They start to, they're still unified, but they start seeking their own lives again, in complement to each other, not in contrast, but in complement to each other. So we see Raven coming out again, and then he comes out even further. He's still there. He's not gone. He comes out further. And then in the final one, starting to play around with some of the stuff, you've seen sort of Greek or Roman vase where they have etching over it. Katie's an artist. She's starting to rediscover her creativity, and the final eye is sort of reminiscent of a Greek vase where you've got the etching of the frost. It's still part of her. It made an imprint on her. It's still part of her makeup. There's a lot of life and exuberance. She's kind of worked all these elements into a story, and Raven is still there, but he's kind of departing. And so that's kind of how the drop caps came together. I don't really have anything else to say about them.
That was so much fun to me because when I've been talking about drop caps, I was talking about just going and finding a font.
Yeah, I know.
And I called Lou and said, yeah, we'll send some pages along shortly. But Carol's making custom drop caps first. And Lou was, oh no, she's going to raise the bar so high, we're going to have to rethink everything.
Not sure that.
Anyway, sorry.
I'm going to stop sharing now.
Okay, Carol, can you make me the host again?
I'll see what I can do here.
Hover over this picture, find the three dots.
Find three dots?
Find the three dots on my picture.
Oh, okay.
The right corner.
Make host. Yes, I do. There you go.
I'm the host again.
Brilliant.
Okay. So welcome, everybody.
Does anyone have any initial questions for John or Carol?
Well, if there are initial questions, they'd be for Carol because she did those. Sorry, that was uncalled for.
I have an initial question, or it's not a question, it's an observation. But when I was reading the book, I was not even aware of the repeated, I always saw the repeated crow in each of the drop caps. I didn't even know they were called drop caps, but until you just gave us that illustration, I was not even aware that the frost image, as the dark frost as opposed to the pale frost, was the same in each. Possibly because I was absorbed in the story and I wasn't paying really, but when you put them all lined up like that, it's really amazing that the unity in them. It's really cool. I'm dazzled.
Well,
Glad you like it.
How it actually enhances. This is illustrated fiction is best when the illustrations actually serve a function of actually growing the story, rather than just making a picture out of something that we've already seen or in our minds. And I think especially with the drop caps, it's just amazing how you can chart the progression of the story just through the opening letter.
Well, some of my favorite books are obviously ones that you pick up something more when you read it. So I was hoping that it was something I knew it wasn't going to be something that would jump out at people, and I knew it was going to be something that, I mean, you would never know unless you sort of hear a key. But I was hoping that at some point people would start to pick up and like probe it a little bit and dig into it a little bit, so that there's more that can be uncovered on further readings.
Well,
So we're
I
trying to
think
bring that forward on the books as they come out.
for
In our
those,
next book that came out this year, Christmas Past. Let's see if I can find one. They're little scene dividers. Here's two. Don't know if you guys can see the little scene divider here. If you look at these really closely, Carol had Morse code in those. So
Oh, wow.
You would never know. You would never know.
Yeah.
No one would
That's
ever
really
know
That's a
that.
very special kind of reader that picks that up.
special. But it's such a wonderful little secret detail that you can go through Carol's work in both books and you'll find meaning and symbol and little hidden surprises. I also love how some of her frost, the way she's arranged it, look like raven feathers.
Yeah.
I actually thought that's what it was. I thought it was supposed to be feathers. But seeing it as frost, now that you mention that, I can definitely see it. Also, just since I'm talking anyways, we'll throw out there, I will be honest, I noticed at the beginning of the chapters, I'm like, oh, that's really pretty. I like those designs. Would not have guessed the progression, but seeing it now, like having it in front of me and seeing it all, like I knew they were beautiful anyways, but the story that they alone tell was awesome. So much appreciated.
I'm glad you like them.
what I was going to say is that I think for those of us who are appreciative of art, but not necessarily art scholars, we absorb this kind of thing subliminally. You know, it's not a conscious thing that we are paying attention to, that each drop cap is a little more elaborate than the previous, but it does affect us in some way. I have a question that actually is for both of you. I mean, Katie is an artist in this story, and Carol, when you were coming up with the illustrations, not the drop caps, but the drawings, were you imagining that they were drawings that Katie, are they similar to the kind of artwork she might have made? And John, did you feel that those drawings related to the kind of artwork Katie would have made when she was not blocked?
I'm going to say yes and no. I sort of started out by like, I'm just going to do drawings. And then as they sort of progressed, it became clear that's like, Katie's got a sketchbook. I bet this is the kind of thing she would doodle. Like she would just capture these little snapshots of things. So there is it fits.
That's exactly the way I see it. I in a sort of meta sense, I think that these are not just illustrations of the story, but illustrations from the story. And when I was expanding the story, that was how I thought about it. And what triggered that for me was the illustration of the pearl necklace, because it doesn't really show the character's face, but focused on the object. And I sort of thought of, Katie drawing that, because she would be focused not on herself, but on the gift. So when I was writing the expanded version, I was definitely thinking of the illustrations as Katie's art. So I don't think it was that way in the first version of the story, but the second version is a much richer expression of that core idea. And in that case, I was definitely thinking of these illustrations as being artifacts from the story itself.
Yeah, it's a great touch.
It's a good question, though.
Definitely.
What? Yeah, I can't believe I don't know the answer to this question. But what order did you do these in?
Raven was the first.
It was the first. Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Christmas Past was the second.
Oh, okay.
Um,
So that means Star Wars the third, or do we break order?
yeah, no, actually, the order that
Oh,
you're seeing them
right.
was the order they were written. When I put them together in the collection, what became Christmas Past was it was then called I'll Be Home for Christmas, which turns out is the title of a lot of books,
Yeah.
movies, a song. There's no way I was going to be able to call this I'll Be Home for Christmas, and I think Christmas Past is a much better title anyway. But I forgot what I was talking about. Yeah, that was
The order.
in the collection. That was going to be the first book.
Oh, okay.
Star in the East was the third. That was the one where we had this wacky idea that just getting these books out in time isn't hard enough. So Carol was going to do the illustrations first, and then I would have to come up with a story to match them. So she did a page of thumbnails, and I think I got all but one, and that was because I forgot it. And it was not at all.
I thought you were going to pick like, a handful, and you're like, I got them all in.
I can't remember what they all were now, but
That was after that trip to I took a trip to Eastern Europe and came back, and we were kind of experimenting with how to make a story, how to collaborate on making a story. So I just like collected a bunch of things from travel, really, the kinds of little things that might make an impression on you while you're traveling, like an ATM receipt, or I honestly don't remember what they all were.
there was an ATM. There were toys. There was a jewel. A picture of immigrants. A family photograph.
Yeah.
And somehow this turned into a sort of Indiana Jones National Treasure type of globetrotting action adventure Christmas story.
Yeah.
Hey, Benji, by the way, for those of you who don't know Benji, Benji is the guy who I've been telling everybody to read his book. It's really amazing. It's called Impacted, and it's absolutely terrific.
People might have already read that were here. It was our book club book in I want to say November.
It was November, I think. I'm driving, so sorry, you're gonna have me. I'm gonna have you on mute mostly. I just wanted to attend.
Thanks, Benji. I appreciate it.
No
Anyway.
problem.
I have a question.
Go
Can I
ahead.
ask a question about the plot actually, or the theme? At the beginning of the book, Katie is frozen because, and maybe I'm coming out of this because I am a former romance novelist, but she's frozen because she's coming out of a really bad relationship. At the end of the book, her relationship with Luke is in some way ending because he has turned into a raven, but now that awakens her creativity. Her creativity seems to be reborn. I mean, were you trying to explore how love affects our creativity? Or, I mean, their ending, I felt very wistful at the end because he's flying off. He's, it's a sacrifice to her. She has to do this to save the world, basically, to keep it, to let it thaw out and stop being eternal winter. And yet that thaws her creativity out, whereas the douchebag she was with at the beginning, I'm blanking on his name, the bad guy, but that was what really locked her up. I mean, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what you're saying about relationships in this book.
Boy, howdy, is that a hard question?
That's
I
really
don't think it
good.
was a
It's a really
Yeah.
good observation.
I think, I was sort of thinking of this was driven by mythology. And the core mythology that I play with the most is the Arthurian legends. The Grail story. Something that both heals and wounds. And if there's anything that both heals us and hurts us, it's love. So the first love is not an especially healthy one. It's a pretty toxic love, but don't be fooled. Bad relationships that end hurt at least as much as good relationships that end. Toxic relationships can be, extraordinarily painful. But in the end, the toxic relationship, in a lot of ways, in my mind, Katie was sort of a victim of it. She didn't make the choice to end it, although she's clearly better off without it. But in the end, it's her sacrifice and her choice, and it's her power that reawakens her own creativity. So Raven appearing as sort of a spark, that's the miracle. But what happens with the miracle and what she does with the miracle is her own choice and her own power and her own creativity. So that's probably the best answer I can come up with. The best answer I can probably come up with is I don't know. That was what felt like the authentic story for Katie. She's a person who's wounded and she's lost the ability to create, like a Fisher King wound. She's lost the thing that makes her most authentically herself. And what reawakens her and puts her in a position to reclaim it is love. And her choice to potentially let go of that wound and face the pain reawakens that well of creativity. So the story had to end probably with her creating something, but I thought that was too obvious and too easy an end. So making the ice sculpture was sort of creating, and then putting her in a position where she was about ready to create, and it looks like she's about to start this period of creativity again, but not necessarily doing it yet. Felt like the most authentic ending for that story. I do have a sequel in mind where she and Raven team up to fight off demons from the under. No, I'm kidding.
Hey, I'd read it.
I had to listen to where he was going because he could have been serious.
Lou never knows, because there's been at least one that Lou thought I was kidding. I had this idea to tell a story, not just only dialogue, but only one character's dialogue. And then I sent Lou like half of the story. Unfortunately, that's all that's been written is that half. It's still an experiment, but just to see if you could tell without description or action or anything except for dialogue, and without cheating, like, what do you mean? What do I want for dinner?
It's a fascinating exercise.
Yeah, the idea is that the guy is dating a ghost, and he doesn't know it. And then the twist at the end is that he's also a ghost, and he hasn't realized that yet. But the idea, I think I may save that idea for when I have a stronger idea. Now I know the technique will work, but a story where somebody is disempowered or doesn't have a voice for some more profound reason. But I think Lou thought I was kidding when I said I wanted to try that and send it along.
I did.
Well, back to the original question, I just think that is such a great question about the effect on creativity. And I was digging a lot into how they play off of each other and the role that they play for each other, and how they there's that attraction and redefinition and fulfillment. Like they fulfill each other, they build each other back. And then there's this moment where, it's like the complete fulfillment was not going to be together. And so I think that's a little, that is a little bit of a bittersweet moment when they don't get to just like keep living in Alaska and drinking hot cocoa and playing games all day. It's like they have more to do in the world, and that we hope they're going to come back together at moments. But I love the fact that they completed each other in a way that Raven goes off to be Raven again, and Katie goes off to make art. And I think that's a great observation. So thanks for bringing that forward.
I just want to point out what Gillette said in the chat. She said, I liked how the ephemeral quality of Katie's ice feather reflected the same quality in her relationship with the Raven.
Or Dolores.
Or Dolores. It's
Yeah,
one or
we
the
don't know
other.
whether it's Gillette or Dolores.
Yeah.
Can you, I wonder if she can
yes.
expand on that observation.
I think she's on mute, so she'd have to type.
Yeah. You want to riff on that, John?
I replied, thank you.
Very profound.
Well said.
I wanted to ask where you folks found the idea of Inuit mythology in the first place, because I know I'd never heard of it before reading Raven Wakes the World.
I've always loved mythology, and I had been reading a book called Trickster Makes the World, which is a book about trickster figures in world mythology. And so often the world gets made sort of by accident by a trickster figure. There seems to be two primary motifs in the way the world comes into being. One is either music or a shout, called. And I think that's art making. And the other is sort of a trick or an accident. I love how those go together. So that was the two things that sparked the idea were just, I was thinking of winter, and, when you think of winter, you think of snow. And most of the writing I do in some way involves mythology, either overtly or indirectly. Even I wrote one that's sort of a hard sci-fi, astronauts versus dinosaurs. And no, that's not a joke. It's a real thing, which doesn't really have any mythic elements, except that one of the characters spends a lot of time thinking about religion and mythology and what that means to a scientist. So even that story has elements of mythology in it. And there's a large degree to which, all the books I've been working on collectively have been my way of sort of exploring a personal theology. Mythology is always there. And with these Christmas stories, a sort of, Lou called them Christmas adjacent, which I think is the word I'm going to use from now on, because they're not really Christmas stories in the traditional sense. I was about to say, you'll never see a nativity or manger scene, but the next one's about the wise men. So
that's true.
Not so much with that, but
you never see Santa Claus, right?
I'm thinking.
Oh, what am I saying? Of course.
Spoiler alert there, Lou.
All right, that was really dumb of me, but you'll forget that by the time. Yeah, that's true. Okay.
Yeah. It's funny. The other thing that sparked this book was Carol gave me a work of art for Christmas, which I happen to have with me. It's this. It was a print that Carol made. I'm trying to hold it straight, and that's about as good a picture of it as I can get. So I hope you guys can all see it. But I didn't know who it was, and this woman looked very haunted. I mean, those are haunted eyes to me. She's white, it's dark. That made me think of winter. And I was wondering who this woman was and what her story was. And this is my inner Katie. This is where Katie was born. I told Carol that later. She says, no, that's not it. And she, Carol told me the story of who that actually was. Not Katie at all.
I was thinking Theodosia, but you go with Katie, that's fine.
Now, who's Theodosia?
So I was thinking more, I've lost the word for it. Anyway, a figure in history.
Right. But this, to me, this image is what is where Katie came from. But the art that Carol did is very iconic. It really does look like a religious icon in a lot of ways. But the coldness of it, the haunted quality, and the expression on the face looked wounded and hurt to me, but very, very soulful. And wondering what her story might be, and the fact that it looked like a religious icon got me connecting it with mythology, which is a very long answer to a short question. And by the way, in the comment, Grandmaster Tolkien is where my writing life was born. Narnia and Tolkien were the first experience of the numinous to me. So yes, the whole idea of mythopoeia came from Tolkien and Lewis.
Indeed.
Another question, if nobody else, could you talk a little about just the mechanics of living on this remote island? I mean, people do that. I saw in your afterword, or I guess your forward or whatever, that you had a friend or somebody who lived on this island. But I mean, I was transfixed by the sheer mechanics of her having to take a boat over to get her groceries. And I kept wondering why her truck battery didn't die while it was like over on the mainland. Or, I mean, just could you talk a little about that?
It's a funny story. After the novel version of Raven came out, I got a really lovely email from somebody who went to my website after reading the book and sent me an email saying that they really liked the book and saying how much that she learned about Alaska from it. And I was cringing, thinking, "Oh no," because my Alaska is basically Narnia. One of the questions I gave Elizabeth, if you guys didn't have any, was what kind of research I did for this, because the answer to that is none. I did look up versions of the Raven story, but everything in Alaska I just plain made up. To me, it was more of a mythic island of the soul, where she's apart from the world, apart from community, and putting some kind of barrier between her and any kind of society was more thematic than literal. As for why the truck battery didn't freeze, in Alaska, there's a salt casing that you can get for batteries that maintains the charge. And no, I honestly, I just never thought of it. So I don't know why her battery didn't freeze. Raven, I think, was already influencing a bit of that magic, and that light had come, but it couldn't quite reach to Katie yet. He had to get to her physically, but he could reach her truck.
In some
honestly.
northern places, you can plug your car in to keep the battery warm. But I didn't mean specifically that. It was more of the island was like a metaphor for her creativity. It was frozen, it was blocked, she was isolated, she was out of touch with her own creativity.
Yeah, she was that blank canvas.
As artists, literary or visual artists, I mean, do you feel that way when you're blocked? Or if you say neither of you is ever blocked, I'm going to disconnect myself from this Zoom. But you know, is that how you visualize being creatively blocked, if you are ever creatively blocked?
No. Boy, this question and the one in the comments go really well together. For those of you who are I understand that most of the people who attend the book clubs attend the recorded version much later. So those of you viewing at home probably won't get to see the comments. So I'm going to read that comment, but it says, as a writer, do you see stories in pictures the same way that Katie heard the voices in the canvas and the stone calling to be released? I do not. It starts with words for me. So what Katie experiences is not what I experience. To me, it's the sound of the words and the sound of the language that gives birth to the story and the way the story shaped. I was, really trying to create an inner landscape for Katie. So this would be an interesting question to turn to Carol next, because she's much more visual than I am. I think most people are much more visual than I am. I start with the words. As for blocked, usually for me, when I'm blocked, it means that I haven't done my homework and I don't really know my story. I have a video that's on my website that talks about the pieces of story, the structure of story. And I think there's 8 key points in a story that you have to know, or else you're going to have to rewrite a lot. And I'm way too lazy to do that at this point in my life. So if I know those 8 points, I generally know how to get from one to the other to the other. And when I find myself getting blocked, it's because I realize I've made a mistake and I need to go back and do rewriting or restructuring. And that's laziness coming through. If I do my homework up front, I generally, the key points, because those points cause a change in the character and a change in the shape and the direction of the story. They make what happens next inevitable. I mean, the best example of one of those points in the story I can think of is in The Matrix, when Neo has to choose a red or a blue pill. Whatever choice he makes, the story is definitely going to be different after that. It can't go back to who it was before. When Elsa re-enters Rick Blaine's life in Casablanca, the story's going to change. It can't go back to the way it was. What happens after that is inevitable. Now, between those, you get to make it up, and that's where you get to invent. But if you don't know those 8 parts, you're gonna be stuck. You're gonna spin your wheels a lot, and you're probably gonna have to do a lot of rewriting. Once you know those 8, then Benji likes to talk about hearing the characters talk to him, and I think that can happen once you know those 8 points. And if you don't, you're going to get blocked. I think if you do the work up front. Now, Lou goes way, way, way further than I do. Lou makes a spreadsheet. Can I tell this?
Sure, go right ahead. I preach it, so go ahead.
I mean, Lou is almost Carol-esque in his ability to make a spreadsheet. But he has every scene, the viewpoint character of that scene, and the events of the scene. I think
the columns are it's the number of the scene, the point of view in the scene, the action that takes place in the scene, the purpose of the scene, which is the critical column, because in my opinion, no 2 scenes should ever have the same purpose. And it's not fair to change the language around to make the same purpose sound like different things. That's not acceptable.
What if it's the mirror?
What? Oh no, but then it has a different purpose.
Okay.
And then the last column is just notes that I leave for myself, because often what you need to be able to do is remind yourself what you were really thinking when you wrote this scene, or you came up with the idea for the scene, was that this was going to happen to this character, or this was going to mark a moment in this character's life, and that had to you had to make sure to hit that. But yes, every scene fully developed, and there's a reason for it, which is that you never get blocked if you do that. Now, interestingly, you can get blocked writing the outline. You get blocked writing the spreadsheet. I have had that experience. I've had the experience of going 25 scenes into a book and suddenly realizing no idea what number 26 is.
When I was writing the astronaut versus dinosaur story, I really tried to do that. I was going to outline everything. It started life as a screenplay, and screenplays are all about structure, and they have to be really, really, really tight. So I started really breaking down and doing an almost Lewis-esque level outline for it. And I got about halfway through. I started thinking, well, I'm going to just make sure that the actual pages will fit this. So I'm going to write just a little bit. Then I'll come back to the outline. And of course, by that point, I knew the whole story so well that I just wrote the whole thing really, really quickly. But the exercise of, while I was typing the first part of the outline, in my mind, I was writing the second part. So I already knew all these elements and exactly where it was going and how long it would take to get there. But by physically doing the work over here, I had mentally done the work over here.
Sure.
So the work was still done. Not in the way that would make Lou proud, but in a way that got the story done. And the screenplay version needed very little revising. When I wrote the novel, the first version of the novel felt very much like a novelization of a screenplay. It took, I think, a pass and a half to really turn it back into a novel. With Raven, I never really did an outline, but I knew the stages of Katie's journey. I knew each turning point that was going to change her character. And this was before I really understood the things I know now about story structure and the 8 points I talk about. But it sort of organically fell into that pattern. And it's what helped me understand how that pattern works. But Carol's much more visual, so she probably has a really different take on this.
Well, I think the topic of what blocks you as an artist is a really interesting one, and I'm thinking that if being blocked is defined as really anything that is preventing you from completing the thing that you want to do to your satisfaction, then I'm not sure I can empathize with Katie a lot, because she seems to be someone who's sort of driven by the muse. She doesn't doodle for the fun of doodling. She doesn't have like a lot of different things that she does. It's like, I can't do a sculpture. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to doodle. Or, she's like, she needs to be driven by the muse. And I think sometimes if you're, executing maybe against a commitment or a schedule or anything, it's like, you got to keep going, babe. And so I think this is a super interesting topic. I'd love to hear your own thoughts on it, Barbara. But I think when I run into blocks, I'm running up against my own lack of skill. Like, I can't execute because I lack the skill to do this. And so at that point, I got to hit pause. I got to go get the skill. I got to bring myself up to scratch in that way, and then come back to the task at hand. And then sometimes it's just like you're like cycling through different ideas of like, okay, that's not the one. Okay, let me try something else. Also not the one. And sometimes I'm the victim of my own perfectionism, where I've really successfully like drilled down so far and obsessing so much about one thing that there's nothing fresh or creative about it anymore, and I'm just spinning my wheels. And I mean, a lot of times the only solution for that is just put it down and go do something entirely different. I know for me, what helps is doing something with my hands, like just doing something different, moving my body someplace else, just like shift environments, shift gears, move my body around, just do something, talk to somebody else, just anything. And then I'll come back and I'll realize, you know, that wasn't actually so bad, or, you know, this has got good parts to it, or just, but, you know, a shift in perspective is what's called for. But Barbara, I mean, you seem to be somebody who has good questions and good thoughts. Do you have anything to add to your own question?
All I would say is that if I did a spreadsheet like Lou's, that would block me. What blocks me is if I already know the whole story, then I think, why should I bother writing it? I already know what's going to happen. For me, the writing, it's a process of discovery. I am very much a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants and discover things as I go along. The only other time I'm blocked is because I'm just freaking tired and don't feel like writing, you know, and I know that's what it is. I just don't feel like writing today. And I sit down and force myself to. But for me, yeah, I think if I knew everything that was going to I mean, I have general ideas. I know the basic structure, the basic arc of the story. I usually know where my characters are going to end up. But if I had everything worked out ahead of time, I'd say, well, what's the point of writing it? I already know this story. So that would block me. But, you know, that's the cool thing about creators, is that we each have our own way of doing things. There's no one right way, just whatever works for you. So
Yeah, and I will say that I can name 4 instances where my favorite scene in a novel was not on the spreadsheet. You know, and that's
go.
but I could get to that because I knew exactly where the story was going. Yeah, but as you said, and you know, it would be different. See, I do think, as an editor, that that a lot of writers who don't plan everything out paint themselves into corners, and when that happens, then they might have been better served by planning it out better. I'm not talking about anybody in this room, but you know, sometimes that happens. I mean, you know, and it especially shows up in the last act. You know, the last act is consistently where non-planners run into enormous problems.
But then you just write.
You said
that
the 4th act, you said, I'm sorry.
4th act, yes, it is. Well, no, I was actually speaking of the 3rd act. In fact, John and I have an ongoing discussion about whether a story has 3 acts or 4. His argument is actually a better argument than mine is. But actually is closer to when the arc starts turning down, not the because that's the point at which unplanned stories.
Yeah, we completely agree about the point at which the final act begins.
Yes, we do.
I think I'm somewhere between Lou and Barbara. I mean, literally on the screen here, but yeah, I don't plan as thoroughly as Lou does. I think nobody plans as thoroughly as Lou does.
Served me well.
And it's not just the structure of the novel and the scenes of the novel. For Lou, the planning goes down to sentences. Lou also writes music, so the music really shows up in the novels.
Cadence. You're supposed to have cadence.
Definitely. I think Lou's cadence is much more planned and structured than mine. Mine's a lot looser and more flowy. I could not write the way that Lou writes. Which is good, because I don't think I have it in me to try. But I did try the type of music structure with one novel, because it was based on it came out of the poems of Yeats and the child ballads from Scotland, which is where a lot of our Celtic folklore comes from. So I tried to match the cadence or meter of either those ballads or the Yeats poems. You can't really tell it because I don't break the lines. But tried to match that meter to give it more of a mythic and musical feel. But even that didn't go quite so far as the degree to which Lou crafts his sentences the way a songwriter does.
Well, one of the reasons, though, and this is not meant to be a forum on planning versus pantsing, but one of the reasons that I can do that is because the reason I believe that, but plotting the whole thing out on a granular level is valuable, is because then the only thing that you have to think about, and BK, I definitely get what you're saying about, what's the point of writing it at that point, is that the only thing that I then have to think about is making the sentences sound good. Where I don't have to think about what's going to happen next. Never enters my mind. It's just I know what's happening next. Now how do I write sentences that do that well?
Well, you can redo I fix all the sentences in the rewrite, because I also write music, and cadence is really important to me too. But I write a block of stuff, and then I go back and make the sentences have better rhythm. But again, we each and John, I do have to say there was a real mythic sort of vibe coming out of just the writing style. It was very,
oh, thank you,
very folklore, mythic. That feel. It really, you felt like you were reading an Inuit mythology. It was really cool.
thank you.
I really want. Oh, go ahead.
I was just that's really wonderful. That's completely what I was going for. One of the things that Lou and I talked about when we were doing the edit pass was there's a lot of stuff in there that I don't explain, like how far does the eternal winter go, and I was going, that makes it science fiction,
right,
and not mythology and fairy tale. And we decided to keep it in the mythic realm, and the sort of looseness of the rating I thought was meant to sort of match the cadence of. I went to a festival of Native American oral storytellers, walking distance from where Carol and I live now. At the time, it was a drive, but it was really amazing. And I had that cadence in my head when I was writing it. Sorry, Carol.
I was just going to say, one of the things I like about the story is many of the characters, I feel like I really want to know. I want to hear about Maggie Tallbear. I know stuff's going on with her. I know she's got an interesting life. I just feel like we just sort of glance past all these potential other stories, which is kind of reminiscent of mythology and fairy tales as well. It's like it leads to the next story. So I thought it was really, I would agree with you. I thought it was really rich in that way. We just get a taste of all the people at the restaurant and what's up with the whole chili controversy. And I know the answer to that, but and Maggie Tallbear and everything going on there in the little town. I could hear more stories about that town and about those folks. And where Raven goes.
Yes.
What he gets up to.
If I could, I guess, side in here, kind of coming off of what Barbara said, it really felt almost like poetry as opposed to prose, which I really helped, you know, flow the story. I also really liked how it worked with, you know, Katie talked several times about how she felt very insubstantial. And the writing is so light and almost airy that it really fits with how she feels the whole time. And I just loved how she talked about, like, she worried that the chili would be too substantial, too heavy, which is someone who, you know, I've gone through a terrible breakup that was essentially, you know, was definitely a person who was manipulative and a toxic relationship. And you do feel like everything feels so heavy and too much. And that would just came through perfectly in this. Really, like, the word substantial really sticks in my mind after reading this, and it's the perfect term for it.
You know, using words that way, in a way that's it's sort of almost beyond literal, is something I learned from reading Ray Bradbury. Ray was one of the most poetic of all writers ever. His prose just sings. He and Pat Conroy are my two favorite prose stylists. I also like Mark Halperin a lot. Sorry, Lou. But all he does is language, where Ray also added story to it and character to it. But author's voice, you know, Ray had this amazing author's voice that in anybody else's pen, the author's voice would have been the star of the story.
Right.
And in Ray's, it's almost, oh, there's also this wonderful author voice. You know, I don't know of anybody else who can do it as well as Ray Bradbury. But in my case, there was a deliberate, you know, I'm a disciple of Ray Bradbury and Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. The idea that there's something beyond the stories that comes through the story.
Yeah.
You know, Ray Bradbury never plotted a day in his life.
No, he didn't.
But he's Ray Bradbury. But he also only wrote, you know, 2 or 3 novels and 800 million short stories.
Interestingly, he didn't plot his mystery novels, which I find mind-boggling. But he didn't.
No. He called his novels accidental novels. And some of them were accidental novels, like Dandelion Wine was short stories that he was able to weave together into a novel. Martian Chronicles were short stories that he didn't even bother to weave together into a novel. But if you look at Something Wicked This Way Comes, and it reads just like one of his short stories that just went on for a while. Fahrenheit 451 is the same way. And I think he was still figuring out Fahrenheit 451, because when he wrote the play version, there are these amazing scenes that aren't in the novel at all, but should have been, because they're brilliant. Sorry, it's way off topic.
Well, it's getting a little bit past 8, so are there any final thoughts that anyone has? Want to make comments or anything?
I'll just say I was supposed to leave here 5 minutes. I have another meeting I'm supposed to be at 8 o'clock, but this was just too interesting.
Oh,
if you saw me texting, it was me saying I'm coming late. I was not being rude, but really, really interesting. But I have got to go. But thank you so much. It was a wonderful read. Thank you.
Thanks
See you
for
all
coming,
next
Barbara.
month, I hope. Bye.
Yes.
Thanks for coming, everybody. And for those of you watching at home, thank you.
Yes, and definitely, if you liked Raven Wakes the World, definitely check out Christmas Past, because that one's another phenomenal one. It just came out a couple months ago.
Thanks,
All right,
everybody.
well, thanks, everyone.
And thank you, Theodosia, for the
Thanks.
inspiration.
Nice to meet you all.